Estonia is a country in Europe. Russia is also a country in Europe, but part of it is in Asia. Thank you for watching. Bye.
Okay, sorry, now the real video starts. Russia is a country that has gone by many names, and so is Estonia. But when Estonia makes name changes, these revisions have not usually been by choice, but rather by force. And usually these forceful changes have been brought upon by Russia, who have been able to use their power and influence over their much smaller neighbor to the west to overtake any governmental and economic structure that they have. While there are many time periods that we can focus on between these two countries, for the purposes of this video, let's just focus on the relations between them during the 1940s from a decolonial perspective. Let's seek the question, was Russia's end goal to wholly assimilate Estonia into the USSR?
Yes.
And based on what we find, will they attempt to do this in the future for the Russian Federation?
Yes.
So let's take a trip back to the year 1940. Estonia was willingly under Soviet rule, and when I say willingly, I actually mean that the Soviets, after agreeing with the Nazis to both occupy Poland, kind of just decided that they would just also invade and take over the Baltic states too, for literally no direct reason other than they just could. Sorry, that was a bit farcical. The real reason that they illegally annexed Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania is because of something that I've termed as the Russian superiority complex. After the Soviet-Nazi joint signing of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, the Soviets figured that now would be as good a time as any to increase their sphere of influence over the Baltic states, but especially Estonia, as it already had a great deal of Russian influence already. The USSR was looking to prove itself as one of the great powers of the world, and by overthrowing the governments in 3 countries and replacing them with ethnic Russian puppet politicians originally from those nations, Stalin envisioned the USSR being the equivalent to the US and UK as worldwide superpowers in terms of the global respect they would have. It didn't matter how life was in those countries, as long as the reputation and status of the USSR increased, it would be an absolute win. While there was and still is a decent amount of ethnic Russian people living in Estonia, using this fact to justify the takeover is a moot point, since many of these ethnic Russians were killed or sent to Siberian death camps for not being 100% loyal to the Soviets. And speaking of Soviet death camps, so just how successful was the ESSR? You know, life in the ESSR was just so darn great. Many Estonian people who held power before Soviet annexation were either immediately killed or sent to Siberian death camps.
Doesn't that seem familiar?
Normal people were also sent there, just because they could be.
Doesn't that seem familiar?
At least they also deported a handful of Jews to Siberia to escape the Nazis, because everyone knows that it's much better to be hated for your ethnicity and die in a freezing cold concentration camp than be hated for your religion and die in a slightly less cold concentration camp. How kind of them. Then, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at the situation, the Nazis played the Uno reverse card, invading the USSR and all of their annexed territory. The Estonian people were just a little tired of being pushed around by the Russians for the past year or so, and the Baltic guerrilla forces, who were already planning an attack on the Red Army, controversially decided to fight alongside the Nazis to free themselves of the communist oppression that they were facing. That is how bad they were being mistreated by the USSR. They would rather be puppeted around by the Nazis than the Soviets. In 1944, the Red Army finally pushed the Nazis out of Estonia, reclaiming it once again as the ESSR. Knowing that an army large enough to take down the Soviets wouldn't be coming anytime soon, more than 155,000 people fled Estonia to neighboring nations as immigrants. Seeking the glory that they couldn't achieve before the Nazi invasion, the Soviets began imposing themselves even harder upon the Estonians. Most notably, this included the heavy taxation to fund the war effort. Those who opposed this, believe it or not, were either killed or sent to Siberian death camps. I know, big shocker there. For around the next half-century, Estonian repressions continued as the Russification process was in full stride, and would be until the fall of the Soviet Union. Estonia reverted back to a republic state, as tensions between the two countries eased up. And by eased up, I actually mean that Russia would have probably eaten Estonia again by now had it not been for NATO protecting all of the Baltic states from being invaded upon. Don't believe me? Ask Crimea how they're doing right now. To sum this all up, the Soviet Union tried to impose themselves over smaller nations as a means of setting up spheres of influence there to spread not only their culture and beliefs around there, but to also appear as a country who had the power to make their neighboring nations better because of them. In their power-hungry infused madness, fueled by the Nazis also trying to do the same exact thing, the USSR were on a quest to prove they were on the same influential level as the other global powerhouses at the time. Were they successful in their endeavors? Well, I guess that's up to you.